Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and today we're continuing our mini training series, and we're talking about what plants to grow in an intensive garden, because if you're looking for a sustainable garden that can feed you and your family, then you're going to need to know what to grow to help keep it sustainable. And one of the wonderful things about gardening is that you can change how you're growing whenever that you decide to, and there's such a huge diversity of seeds available, and this is really one of the key pieces of an intensive garden and a self-sufficient garden is to have a food supply that is independent, right? Independent from the grocery store is what a lot of us are trying to achieve, but also being independent from buying seeds from a seed supplier each year. And there is a way that we can do this, and you might be thinking, well, how do we do this, Emma? And that's by growing open pollinated seeds. Now, open pollinated seeds mean that you have a continuous supply of food. Like, for real, you can save these seeds year after year and keep growing food. And open pollinated seeds, let's get on the right page here, are those that, if properly isolated from other varieties in the same plant species, are going to produce seed that will result in a plant very similar to the parent, right? This is known as being true to type in the seed industry. And you might have seen that being explained on, blogs or articles, whatever, right? That's what true to type means. It means that when you grow out that seed that you have saved, it's going to look the same as the parent plant that it was saved from. Now, growing open pollinated seeds helps to encourage insect pollinators and biodiversity into your garden. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in an upcoming episode, but we want these things to visit the garden often. They help manage pests, and of course they help to pollinate the flowers that help to improve yields. And I really encourage you to grow heirlooms, open pollinated and organic seeds in your garden so that you can see what grows best for you, your garden, your climate, right? Seeds that are produced organically, though, are used to low inputs, right? So there's low, not necessarily care that's being given to them, because there is, but, you don't have a farmer wandering around hitting the parent plant up with pesticides all the time, as an example. There's no herbicides that are really being used to manage the weeds and things. So organic produced seeds often have really good traits that we want to use, and they're really good for adapting to local climates. And if you're interested in a little bit more about adapting, then you can definitely check out the episode I did about landrace gardening. Now, obviously we're going to need to get open pollinated seeds, right? We can't be 100% reliable, from a seed supplier. We do need to source some seeds, and there's lots of great suppliers that are around. And we've had a couple of great seed suppliers here on the podcast. So we had Giving Ground Seeds, and we also had Dale from Delectation of Tomatoes on the show. And both of these seed suppliers do open pollinated seeds, but there's lots and lots of others that are available, and you can search for ones that are in your area. You can just do a search online for open pollinated seeds, and there's lots of companies that come up. But one thing that I will tell you is even with the catalogs and things that are coming through the door, the online descriptions, whatever, you want to really check those descriptions carefully, right? Because they will identify if the seed is an heirloom or an open pollinated variety. If it says F1 or a hybrid, these are not GMO seeds, right? GMO is different to a hybrid. They're, doing modification on a genetic level, whereas a hybrid is kind of a cross-pollination thing. And you don't necessarily want to be saving seed from a hybrid plant, because the plants that grow from that saved seed from a hybrid are not going to be anything like the parent plant that you saved that seed from. You want to be saving seeds from non-hybrid plants to take the next step in sustainable gardening, and these plants are open pollinated varieties. Now, you can use your hybrid plant seeds for a breeding project potentially if there's not a patent on there, but This isn't the podcast that I'm going to be diving into that side of things. But, open pollinated seeds are one of the best ways that we can start to become more self-sufficient in our garden. And that's really one of the best benefits of growing open pollinated varieties, is really saving the seed. There is such a lot of history and diversity in seeds. And, really the overall health of our food system relies on this diversity. And, we're losing the genetic diversity of our seeds. And if you're fortunate enough to see old seed catalogues in a museum, or, maybe you've stumbled across one randomly at a thrift store or at a vintage sale or something, you're going to see that nearly all of the seeds that are listed in that catalogue are no longer available. They have been lost. And there's a number of reasons why we're losing seed diversity, right? Loss of seeds is partly due to centralization, right? As companies are coming in, they buy out smaller companies, right? It's basically how most of our systems in the West are working, right? Plant varieties are often dropped, and they're dropped if they're not commercially viable, such as, they're not able to be harvested easily on an industrial scale. Maybe they don't ship very well, for example, which makes them, not ideal for that large scale farming activity. But sometimes plants can be dropped if they're not trendy or popular with home gardeners. Like, how many times have you had a seed catalogue come through the door and you've looked at them? And I don't know if you ever go back and look at like previous years. I do sometimes, because there's things that I will have highlighted in a previous year's catalogue that I wanted to check out and see, oh, well, maybe they've got it this year and I'll get it this year. Now I've got some money saved up to do that. And that variety's not there. Like, seed companies drop things if they're not trendy or if they're not popular, or, the sales aren't there that they were hoping for, right? Makes sense. But other causes of seed loss, or seed diversity loss, I should say, are things like singular locations that are growing those crops geographically, right? If something happens to, these areas where we're growing a lot of these things, like a natural disaster, for example, that can impact what varieties then become available. Other things impact it, like legislation changes. We heard about utility patents when we talked with Claire from OSSI in one of our previous episodes, that open source seed initiative. That's another reason for us losing seed diversity, but also loss of skills. And skill loss is such an interesting reason why we're losing seed diversity, because once, not all that long ago, but it was a number of years ago, farmers and gardeners always saved seed from their gardens and fields to grow again in the following years. This was normal practice, right? Certainly in Europe, like, seed saving was very much a common thing when it comes to gardening, and it was kind of like a maintenance thing that was being done by like market farmers and stuff. But once these seeds were passed on in a family to steward and maintain, I mean, one look at an heirloom seed supplier catalogue or online will show you like these really wonderful names, like Auntie Ida's bean or the Cairns family rutabaga, for example, right? Those seeds have a story behind them, and they've been valued and cared for by that family, by each generation that inherited that seed. And, it was my grandparents and parents that taught me how to save seeds. And what an amazing gift to know how to do, because knowing how to save seed and growing your own seeds means that you can sidestep vulnerability and have a thriving food security from your own garden. So now that you know what sort of seeds that you're needing to look for, remember, open pollinated, let's talk about some of the plants that you want to be growing in your intensive garden, because an intensive garden is like, you need to be able to grow calorie crops, plants that are going to provide nutrition like vitamins and minerals, and plants that are going to manage the health of the soil, right? This is all what's going to form into that self-sufficient and sustainable garden. And when it comes to growing calories, right, your intensive garden is going to be feeding you and your family, so you have to grow the plants that you like to eat, okay? I don't know anybody that is going to sit there and eat like, I don't know, like half a ton of beets, just so they can get the calorie content. I mean, I struggle to get members of my family to eat beets at the best of times, let alone trying to eat them, to get like calories to, function normally, right? And I know it seems really simple, but often when we're reading about methods of growing, and growing to feed ourselves, we can very easily wind up growing things in the book just because they're there, right? There is absolutely no point in growing a garden bed full of sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes or beans if you hate eating them, right? Sure, they're full of calories, they're full of nutrients that your body needs, but if you hate to eat them, give them a pass, right? Grow what you love to eat, okay? If you didn't learn anything from this episode other than open pollinated seeds and grow what you love to eat, okay? Those are my 2 take-home messages. But it's true, sometimes we get very caught up in, growing some of these things because, they're good for the soil or because, they're good for you nutritionally. But if we're not going to eat them, they end up going to waste. And that's not good either, because you really should be putting that space to use to be growing to feed you and your family, right? So let's talk about what a calorie crop is, because you might not know. And a calorie crop is simply a crop that provides lots of calories, right? They're usually grains, right? Things like corn, wheat, barley, rice, or staples like potatoes, right? Like Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, those kind of thing. There's other crops that have a lot of calories in them too, like onions, sunchokes, and garlic, but you might not want to be eating those in a huge quantity, right? If I eat garlic bread, for example, my husband avoids me for days because all he can smell is garlic from me. I mean, sure, it keeps the vampires away, but it's not going to do anything if I've got, nice dinner plans with my spouse. But these are things that have been traditionally grown, right, to produce calories. And, that, like we said, rice is a good one, wheat is another one, and corn. And you'll notice that, depending on where you're located, there's going to be a calorie crop that grows better for you. So corn, for example, is native here to the Americas and grows very well. Potatoes, Europe, grow very well, right? Rice, different parts of the world, you've got Spanish rice, you have Asian rice, there's rice that they grow out in India. There's lots of different varieties, and they grow depending on those climatic conditions, right? So where do you go when you're looking for information about a calorie crop, right? There's some great resources. John Jevons' book on how to grow more vegetables and fruits, nuts, berries, grains, and other crops than you ever thought possible on less land with less water than you can imagine. It's quite a mouthful for a title. I'm going to put it in the links in the description for this out in the homesteading list and the gardening list. But this book actually has got lots of valuable information in it. It's got these really helpful reference tables in there that break down things like calories and even some of the nutrients like calcium levels that are there in the crops. So it's a good resource to have a look at that. And of course, now we're living in a digital age. It's really easy for us to search the internet for some of this information. But we don't just want to be focusing on calorie crops, right? It's true that calorie crops contain vitamins and minerals, or vitamins and minerals. Fruits, veggies, and herbs all contain different levels of vitamins, right? Things like vitamin A or one of the B vitamins, for example, right? And your garden needs to grow a variety of edible plants to provide your body with the vitamins and minerals that it needs to function well. And you want to be growing things that you like to eat, of course, right? Sure, kale, loaded with nutritional benefits, but if you hate eating it, don't grow it. And some examples of plants and vitamins and minerals they contain are things like collard greens, for example, right? They've got vitamin A, vitamin C, they've got a lot of calcium in there, and vitamin B6 or pyridoxine. Winter squash has lots of vitamin A, vitamin C, and B6. It's also got iron, magnesium, and potassium in there. A humble beetroot is packed with folate, magnesium, iron, vitamin C and potassium. And mushrooms that are grown outside or exposed to sunlight provide some vitamin D. So you want to take some time and look at what you like to eat and start to plan your garden around those things, right? Not just for the calories, but also those plants that are providing the nutrition. And if you're stuck on ideas, well, here's some podcast listener favorites. So thank you to everybody who submitted something. Here are some of my favorites that I wanted to share with you as well. So first up is Kathy's recommendation for a rockstar plant to grow, and that one is asparagus. And she says that the crop is getting bigger each year, and it definitely saves money when she doesn't have to buy asparagus fresh in the store. That is really expensive. And asparagus, it takes about 2 years to get established in the garden, but is definitely worth the effort. So thank you, Kathy, for that recommendation. And it's true, fresh asparagus is really delicious, and it is so expensive in the store. Another recommendation is from my good friend Nick from Nick's Allotment Diary on YouTube, and he had some great suggestions for a new gardener. So radishes are super quick and easy to grow, and as are mixed salad leaves in a seed packet. So the seed packet comes ready mixed with different types of lettuce leaf in there, so you'll get different colours or different textures, but they're really easy to get started with. But if you're a new gardener looking to try tomatoes, then definitely consider the Gardener's Delight variety, because this grows clusters of 6 to 12 cherry tomatoes throughout the summer. And this variety grows well for Nick and many other gardeners in the UK. And actually, it was one of the first tomato varieties that I ever learned to grow with my granddad. So I'm very fond of Gardener's Delight myself. But Nick also recommended sunflowers, and that we don't often think of growing flowers for food, but sunflowers are really cool because not only are they bright and cheery, you can actually shell and eat the seeds as well. And Nick does have a sunflower growing competition on YouTube. So those of you with a competitive streak, definitely check that out. And I will make sure to link to Nick's channel in the podcast description so you can go check that out. And lastly is Jennifer in South Georgia. She sent me some amazing photos of her garden, and particularly of her plant recommendation, which are the Oregon Sugar Pod 11 peas. And she says that these are super lush and heavy producers in her garden right up to April. And they tolerate the climate really well in Georgia as a cool season crop. And definitely looking at those pictures, they are thriving in that garden and going up that trellis like crazy. So thank you for the recommendation, Jennifer. And I hope your crocheting is going as well as your garden. So there's some key plants that you can really consider for your garden as well. And that's a really good tip as well, is to ask other gardeners in your area of what is growing well, what varieties are growing well, so you can take a look at those in the plant catalogue and see, are they an open pollinated variety, are they an heirloom variety, and is this something that you really want to have on your property and in your self-sufficient garden. So let's talk about the last one, which is growing compost. And this probably sounds really weird, right? Growing compost? You make compost, Emma, not grow it. Well, in these kind of intensive gardening techniques like that are used in victory gardens and even in farming practices long before that, compost was really made on site, and it was not brought in from somewhere else, right? This is kind of where these intensive gardens somewhat differ from like these no-dig, no-till type of gardens, because you're very much bringing in compost from other sources in that type of setup. But in an intensive garden, or a biologically intensive garden, we really want to be concentrating our efforts to be on site, right? It's the best use of our energy, our money in some cases, like our own resources are able to provide and help our garden grow. So If you've listened to my composting podcast before, or maybe you've read one of my composting articles, then you might remember me talking about greens and browns, or nitrogen and carbon materials. And growing compost is really capturing carbon from the atmosphere in plants that then become the carbon source, or the brown materials, for the compost heap. So this actually helps keep your garden self-sufficient, because those stalks and trimmings, kitchen scraps, etc., they're all going back into your compost that help fuel the garden soil. And if you remember, that soil is what fuels the growth and health of your plants, which obviously means healthier plants and more nutritious plants for you to eat, right? So let's talk a little bit about crops that are good for compost, right? Because composting crops basically produce biomass. So they grow big and tall and capture a lot of carbon in doing that, because as a plant grows, it's converting carbon dioxide in the air into carbohydrates and sugars in the plant, right? That's what then helps it grow. They convert it to fiber and various other things in that plant. Now, grain crops and grass family crops like corn, sorghum, and broom corn are good examples of these kind of compost crops. Grain crops are things like your barley, your wheat, right? Remember those calorie crops that we talked about at the beginning? Some of those can also be compost crops as well. Like, we eat the grain, and then the stalks and stuff can get chopped up and added to that compost bin. So it helps to kind of bring the garden back full circle. And that's what we're meaning by, an intensive and self-sufficient garden. It is all in that circle of life in the garden, right? Things are growing, things die, it decays, and it provides a fuel source for your plants to then grow again. Same with seed. We want to be letting things go to seed somewhat in our garden and saving those, and then growing them again, and then letting some of those go to seed, and then saving those seeds and then growing them again. It's all very like running in a cycle, but it is a cycle that is better for our personal resources, right? If we're not having to keep buying external inputs every year for the garden, that's better for a wallet, right? Remember those reasons for growing an intensive garden at the beginning, but it's also better for the overall health of the garden. And you're going to really hone in your skills at growing, and being able to kind of hone in on those skills year after year means that you're going to have a better garden year after year as well. So that's it for the end of this episode, and I really want to hear from you. So let me know what you're planning to grow. What are your calorie crops that you're growing in your area? What's your favorite nutrition plant? And even what is the compost crop that you're going to be growing? Are you growing something new? I would love to hear from you. So let me know in the Facebook group. And next week we're going to be talking about composting, because that is one of our key things for growing a biologically intensive garden, is that compost, right? Because as you saw, as we were building that soil, we're adding compost. So how do we keep making compost and help keep things going in this self-sufficient garden? So join me next week for that episode in this mini training series. Until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I will see you next week.